26 years after the nuclear exchange, what remained of the Cralasian insurgency had been pushed almost entirely into the west. Pluviose, now known as the Republic of Cralas, had been fighting for almost 40 years in a vain attempt to preserve the Cralasian state. The Cralasians were a pariah, with little to no international support. To the outside world, they seemed on the verge of defeat, low on manpower, supplies, and funding. And yet, less than 3 years later, the free Cralasian state would be admitted to the international Concord with overwhelming approval. After the Treaty of Zakul was signed in 2459, what was once the western portion of the Third Order was annexed to the Holy Tempest Empire. However, internal strife would see the HTE begin to fracture just a few years later. The annexed territories now fell under the so-called Cinema states, the former satellite kingdoms of Camel and Fora and Canushra, plus Yasha and Sinnamahese. The people of these lands are known by many names: Orcs, Beastmen, Dark Elves, but they call themselves the Sinma. Many Sinma had been killed or driven south by the Cralasian regime in the decades following the Great War. After the fall of the Third Order, they took the opportunity to reclaim their lost territories. Cralasian settlers in the region, backed by veteran soldiers of Kralas's many wars, refused to cede it, waging a decade-long guerrilla campaign as they were slowly pushed back. Fighting was mostly dying down by the end of the 2490s. Then, in January 2500, the Sinnamahese First Army captured the populous Cralasian city of Fulak. This was followed a few months later by the Battle of Vinolta Hill, with a large and organized Cralasian counter-offensive into Sinnamahese territory, a major victory after years of steady decline. Some attribute the Cralasian turnaround to a rising figure at the time, a man named Mila Clone. He was the leader of the so-called Redemptionists, seeking to create a modern, internationally recognized Cralasian republic, distancing themselves from the Third Order. He pushed for reforms such as standardized soldiers' pay and more cohesive military organization, aimed at keeping morale high and better facilitating the war against the Cinma states. As time went on, he would become a central rallying figure for many commanders, before eventually becoming head of the new state. As war raged in the northwest, politicians gathered in the international city to try to end it. The Skurian Delegate to the International Concord made Proposal 2500-06-4, calling for the free Cralasian state to be admitted to the IC, on the condition that plebiscites be held in all disputed territories. The proposal was narrowly approved by the General Assembly, but as news made it to northwest Katesh, the response was less than positive. Yasha, Canushra, Sinnamahese, and Scotland refused to hold the plebiscites. They claimed it was outside the Concord's jurisdiction to require the referendums, effectively blocking the Cralasian entry to the IC. At the request of the Cinma states, the OFN began contemplating a large-scale intervention in the war, as Ciyugan and Ceylon began mobilizing troops near the region. Emboldened by the apparent support, Cinma civilians began to target Cralasian minorities in brutal attacks, prompting reprisals from Cralasian civilians against Cinma minorities. International press dubbed this a race war, as images of violence hit the rest of the planet over the young internet. Public outcry led the Vernikian delegate to make Proposal 2500-06-5. The Cralasian delegate was narrowly admitted to the International Concord as a temporary speaker, able to sit in the General Assembly and publicly debate, but unable to vote. That brings us to the International Concord General Assembly. The voting period is closing on the Vernikian delegate's Proposal 2501-04-1, which would sanction Ciyugan and Ceylon for placing their troops near the Cinma states. With only a few minutes before the final count, the proposal is looking unlikely to pass. The temporary speaker from Cralas is making a last-ditch attempt to sway the abstaining delegate of the High Kingdoms of Alaxia to his side, hoping the Alaxians might bring their allies with them. Thanks to International Concord policy, all meetings are recorded, allowing us to listen in on the debate.
This is outrageous! We have received numerous reports by now, following Sinnamahese and Yasha Canushra's refusal to comply with the IC resolution. There was mass murder of Cralasian minorities within Sinnamahese. And yet this body stands idly by as Ciyugan and Ceylon escalate this war.
Sanctioning Ciyugan and Ceylon would be far too damaging for the global economy.
And they destroyed any chance of peace. You would have millions suffer for your convenience.
It is on their shoulders that this race war stands. They added fuel to the fire that triggered it. when they should have used their forces to ease tensions. The OFN claims it wants peace, but this rhetoric needs to be followed up with actions made in good faith. There has been nothing but repeated provocation by OFN member states to artificially incite hostilities in the region.
We simply complied with a request for help from our allies.
We would only seek to pursue peace and harmony in good faith with the OFN. Yet at every step of the way, we've been met by provocation and slaughter. My people are dying, just like they were in the nuclear wars. It is the responsibility of the Concord to ensure that they do not simply stand by idly as evil occurs.
Sanctions should only be issued if Concord laws are broken, which neither the Ciyugan nor Solanese governments have done. The rumors of Cralasians being genocided are as legitimate as those of the Sinnamahese being genocided.
We are yet to be given good reason to support these sanctions. They're, well, simply not in the interests of the High Kingdoms.
Despite his efforts and those of his supporters, the Cralasian delegate would fail to sway any votes, and the measure failed to pass. In Cinnamahese, following defeat in the battles of Winolta Hill and North Eddy, coupled with ongoing supply issues, the government under Emperor Dain was becoming desperate. Believing that the Cralasian capture of the strategically vital Eddy highlands could lead to a total Sinnamahese loss, the Emperor arranged a secret plan. Starting within weeks, Operation Roast Dinner saw the ultranationalist paramilitary group known as the League of Sinnamahese Gentlemen begin to round up and execute all Cralasians living in Cinnamahese. Their corpses were to then be butchered, and the meat used as food to supply the Sinnamahese army, with any excess allowed to be sold in the wet markets across the country. As media coverage of the violence spread to the wider world, public support continued to sway towards the Cralasians. The member states of the International Concord Security Committee, Sironia, Ciyugan, the High Kingdoms, and Sutan, plus temporary members Azeri Bordo, Jimaria, Lunador, and Nordleg, became committed to putting an end to the war. After months of investigation, observation, and planning, the committee produced SC Proposal 2501-11-1, the catchily named International Concord Security Committee Proposal for Peace in Northwestern Katesh. The proposed treaty would have 1. Required a total ceasefire, 2. Created a demilitarized zone between Cralas and the Cinma states in Scotland, garrisoned by a small force of Security Committee peacekeepers, 3. Admitted the Cralasian Free State as a full member of the International Concord. 4. Allowed any ethnic Cralasians south of the DMZ to move north of the line unimpeded. 5. Required Cinnamahese, Yasha, and Scotland hold referendums within 30 years for territories south of the DMZ, which may wish to join the Cralasian state. And 6. Enabled the Security Committee to use force to prevent any violations of the treaty. The proposal was near unanimously passed by the Security Committee, with Sironia abstaining. The treaty was then sent to Cralas, the Cinma states, and Scotland to be signed and put into motion. All refused to sign, and so delegates of those nations were called to speak at the November meeting of the General Assembly, and air their grievances with the proposal. The Jimarian delegate, acting as the Assembly Speaker at the time, was to represent the Security Committee as a whole, while the Skurian delegate would stand in support of the Cralasian temporary speaker.
The issue is that this proposed peace treaty provides no protections for the Cralasians that would be living under the rule of the Sinnamahese government. This treaty would no doubt lead to the extermination of my people within Cinnamahese. That is why the Cralasian ground forces are there in the first place, to prevent genocide.
Oh, please, you Cralasians should be less paranoid. There's no evidence that the Sinnamahese Enforcement Army has ever partaken in genocide or ethnic cleansing.
An attempt at genocide would be a violation of other treaties. It did not need to be stated again within this agreement.
Has that stopped them before?
They are already genociding my people. And yet, there is little to no accountability regarding the slaughter. Even now, this Concord has failed to condemn the violence or take action to stop it. The Concord has set a precedent going all the way back to the nuclear wars, that it will turn a blind side to internal violence, genocide, and crimes against humanity against Cralasians. I cannot accept a treaty that would most likely lead to millions more dead.
Excuse me, please provide images and evidence that the SCA has committed any atrocities. We can assure you Any Sinnamahese citizen which has killed your kind's, quote, civilians, was an independent actor. It is, of course, already illegal to kill Cralasians under Sinnamahese law, with a small fine for each Cralasian murder.
What if the Concord could provide assurances of the protection of ethnic Cralasians?
That is what this Concord has already claimed to do in the past. Each time only to leave my people to die. Where were you when our cities were annihilated in nuclear hellfire? Where were you when our people were rounded up in camps and shot? Where were you when we starved by the millions? When we were forced to flee to the north just to survive? Where was the Concord? It was nowhere. The failure to provide provisions for the protection of Cralasians is a, perhaps deliberate, undeniable oversight on the part of the writers. I demand to know who has made this proposal.
SC Proposal 2501-11-1 was written jointly by the members of the Security Committee in an attempt to rectify the various peace proposals which have so far failed. The entire point of it is to prevent the complete genocide of either the Cralasian people or the Sinnamahese.
The representatives of this nation have before made it clear that any peace would require protections for Cralasian minorities, which this treaty does not provide. And with the current situation in Cinnamahese, we do not believe that their government could be trusted to, in good faith, provide for and care for the local population.
If we were to add in express protections for the Cralasian civilians, then would you agree to the treaty?
Cralasians have learned to accept empty promises.
We accept the referendum as is. There will be a demilitarized zone along the blue line stipulated as per Figure A, and there will be peace.
Bullshit. After 30 years, will you still continue to murder Cralasians?
Protection for Cralasian minorities must occur in actuality first. Crawlis is tired of endless broken promises. We want to see action. We want to see that this Concord can and will protect the Cralasian people against slaughter, to provide for them the basic right to live. Then we will talk about peace. Until then, we cannot trust the proposals of this Concord, or that they would be properly executed.
The proposed treaty is clearly biased.
Need I remind you of the resolution that was passed not too long ago, guaranteeing a plebiscite and peace in Cinnamahese? The Cinnamahese government simply ignored the resolution and refused to comply by it, and the IC did nothing. And here, this proposal rewards that obstinance by granting them further concessions and a blank check to slaughter my citizens.
That resolution specifically did not guarantee anything. It made a request with no backing power, which was directly thought of while Proposal 2501
Quiet!
was.
We will not listen to this endless talk of semantics and how this or that was just a technicality. That treaty was supposed to end this. The Concord has failed to uphold virtually every single proposal regarding my nation.
We ask, how would the International Concord ensure that law is upheld within our territory?
Why should we trust Cinnamahese to rule over millions of our people when the Cinnamahese are actively slaughtering them?
Well, as outlined in the treaty, IC forces will be deployed, boots on the ground. As opposed to the earlier Skurian proposal, which simply made a request, this proposal makes a demand.
Will the delegation from Ginsukyan please turn off your microphone?
Oh, sorry. Gentlemen, please.
Remove this!
I am not a man. Return to your stand, sir. The Concord can assure you that under the watch of the peacekeepers, no genocide will occur.
If you wish to understand why we doubt this Concord so, simply look at the official treaties that have slipped under the radar. Article 4 of the Treaty of Zakul stipulates all Sudanese and Solarian-occupied Cralasians will be moved to Crawlis. This is when the Holy Order condemned our people to die. You all stood and watched. This is ethnic cleansing, ratified by treaty.
Our battle cry. A hurricane.
So, mistakes of the past should condemn all solutions in the future? What alternative do you have? Without peace, this war will surely continue until one side is
That is the way
completely
it
wiped
is.
out.
Stop
This is the
interfering.
proposal to stop the genocide. This is the proposal to end the slaughter.
And frankly, this proposal should mind its own business. What Cralasian and Cinnamahese commit to is none of your concerns. Let us battle in peace.
Cralas is a country born out of mistakes and hardship. We are the way we are because we know when to and when not to trust. Why should we stick our neck out, risk the lives of our people, risk the survival of our entire race in the hopes that the Concord, which has every time before breached our trust and broken their promises, will finally uphold a resolution?
If that is the way you see it, then you have my most sincere condolences, for it seems you consign your own people to certain doom, dismissing any chance of salvation.
If we are to be eradicated, if we are to fail, then it will be by our sacrifice that we have lost, rather than by the treachery of the few.
We Sinnamahese do not feel the need to portray ourselves as victims. We know what they have done, and what we have done, and we regret none of it.
I shall put it bluntly. The Cralasian people are outgunned and outmatched. If you cannot trust the IC to put an end to the genocide, then it likely will only end once no Cralasian is left.
Rather than later, Boss must be defeated.
Now that's just uncalled for. Stop.
You think you can masquerade under a mirage of peace, eh?
Stop this at once. No fighting on the assembly floor.
You're not a goddamn victim, you're in
Security.
To the wider world, a peaceful end now seemed impossible, and with mounting evidence of the Sinnamahese atrocities, the Security Committee quickly passed the Jimarian drafted SC Proposal 2501-12-1, dubbed Plan B. The final vote was 8-0, with Sironia once again abstaining due to their shaky history with Cralas. Plan B called for immediate military intervention against the Cinma states in order to establish two 30-year IC mandate governments. The Mandate of West Katesh would govern over disputed territories currently under Cralasian occupation, stabilizing the region before eventually overseeing referendums on whether the individual counties would rejoin Cinnamahong or become part of the Free Cralasian state. The Mandate of Cinnamahong would serve to depose their genocidal government and prevent further aggression. Plans were made. An IC coalition would move through Ciyuga, Solon, and Skoitlan, then wait on the border to attack the Cinma state simultaneously from the east and south. Meanwhile, Cralasian forces would attack from the north, driving into Cinnamahong. They agreed to withdraw north of the West Katesh Mandate after the Cinma governments had capitulated. Around a month later, a force of over 1.6 million peacekeepers from Azieri, Ciyuga, Fazar, the High Kingdoms, Jimaria, Lunador, Nordleg, Sutan, and Skuria, with support of over 1,500 modern aircraft, tens of thousands of armored vehicles, millions of lighter vehicles, and plenty of artillery pieces, had taken up staging positions on the borders of the Cinma states. By this time, the Sinma-Cralas War had devolved into trench warfare, fought mostly with equipment decades out of date, and with little in the way of armored or air support. When IC troops crossed into the Cinma states on the afternoon of January 8, 2502, the Cinma armies were rapidly overwhelmed. It would take just 9 days for the governments of Camel and Fora, Cinnamahong, and Yasharkanushra to capitulate, and for fighting to more or less end. But with the end in sight, Skoitland backed out of the treaty and refused to cede the portion of their territory which was to become part of the Mandate of West Katesh. In response, the Free Cralasian state, tired of the Concord failing to uphold its treaties and agreements, refused to withdraw its forces from Cinnamahong until Skoitland complied. Before it was even properly suggested, the Solonese government made it clear that should the IC attempt to use force to make Skoitland comply, the full force of the Solonese army would deploy to support their ally. This began nearly 2 weeks of meetings between diplomats from various SC nations and Cralas, in which Cralas refused to negotiate on any point. A number of closed-door security committee meetings to discuss possibilities, and numerous other attempts to find a solution. All of this led to 3 solutions. Option 1. The security committee could pay Skoitland to accept the terms. While this was initially favored by the SC, it became clear the Scottish diplomats were just going to demand arbitrarily high prices the IC could never meet. Option 2. Have the Peacekeepers invade Skoitland. Sutan and Ciyuga were strongly opposed, and the SC was not willing to declare effectively open war against the OFN. Option 3. have the peacekeepers invade Cralas, driving their army north of the line by force. This option was most favored by Jimarian, Fazar, Azieri, and the High Kingdoms, though opposed by Sironia and its allies Lunador and Nordleg. There was also a fear from Sultan and Ciyuga that the bulk of the Cralasian army might be quickly defeated, but it would no doubt be a commitment to a decades-long guerrilla war in the mountains. With 3 bad choices before them, the ICSC was drafting plans to carry out option 3, when a 4th path finally presented itself. Finally, after 12 days, the Cralasians were open to negotiation. After much back and forth, instead of the original Plan B, it was agreed. 1. The Free Cralasian state would be admitted to the IC, with recognized ownership over almost all land they occupied at the time, without referendums from the people living there. 2. The creation of a 200-meter wide demilitarized zone between this new Cralasian border and the Cinma states. 3. Sinnamahese would remain under an international Concord mandate government until protection of minorities under an independent government could be assured. 4. The Free Cralasian state and Sinnamahese would hand over all suspected war criminals for trial at the international court, except the Sinnamahese emperor, who would be tried in Cralas. 5. Cralas, the Cinma states, and the members of the Security Committee would agree to a 30-year truce, unless any other parts of the treaty were violated. While the Jimarian and Azieri delegates in the SC continued to advocate for the invasion of Cralas, they would end up abstaining in the SC vote to approve the treaty, and both nations would go on to sign the agreement, leading finally to the entry of the Free Cralasian state into the international Concord, and an end to the war on January 30th, 2502. For decades, the aftershocks of the Third Sinma-Cralas War would be felt around the globe. Inspired by the Sinnamahese, the Villatari of Heboy would begin its own cannibalistic genocide of the nation's Ronintan minority, leading to the overthrow of that government and eventually the Second Heboy War, which leaves the island divided to this day. In Cralas, members of the War Council believed that the ongoing war in Heboy and peace with the international Concord would prevent foreign intervention against the Free Cralasian state, allowing them to expand east towards the historic Cralasian homeland. So, shortly after the West Cralasians' first victory in living memory, Nella Clown would order an invasion of neighboring Marinia. The attacks soon became bogged down by supply issues and mutinies among the army, alongside an unexpectedly well-equipped enemy force. Eventually, an agreement was reached with Marinia to allow Cralasian soldiers to pass through a designated corridor to head east. Clon, now head of the Provisional Civilian Government, had hoped this corridor might allow his new nation to reconnect and reunify with Eastern Cralasians, but quickly found the Cralasians of Open Slomia, Colomia, and the Corporate Republic had little interest in reuniting the Empire. An alliance between the countries was eventually formed instead, known as the Pan-Cralasian Cooperation Organization. The countries remain on generally friendly terms to this day, though any ideas of a reunified Cralasian state seem practically absurd. Emperor Dagot was taken to the emissary of the new path, and instead of execution was sentenced to complete ritual trials and repent before God, tasks the aging former emperor is still undergoing to this day. The governments of the other Cinma states were deposed, but their monarchies were allowed to remain. As for the nation of Sinnamahese itself, it still remains under Concord mandate 25 years later. Its northern border is still patrolled by IC peacekeepers, and internally they continue to fight against nationalist insurgents. 5 years from now, the mandate will end, but none can truly say what will happen after that.